Welcome back to Books and Coffee. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite books that I read last year. It's a book called Cured, and it's all about the ability to cure the things that doctors have told us are incurable. So the story of this book is Dr. Jeff Rediger, a world-leading Harvard psychiatrist, has spent the last 15 years studying thousands of individuals from around the world, examining the stories behind extraordinary cases of recovery from terminal illness. Observing the common denominators of people who have beaten the odds, Dr. Rediger reveals the immense power of our immune system and unlocks the secrets of mind-body connection. In Cured, he explains the vital role that nutrition plays in boosting our immunity and fighting off disease, and also outlines how stress, trauma, and identity affect our physical health. In analyzing the remarkable science of recovery, Dr. Rediger uncovers the power of our mind to heal our body and shows us the keys to good health. And so the story of this book is that this doctor started noticing that there were these pockets of people who would get these terminal diagnoses, right? The doctors would tell them whatever it is that you have is incurable, your time is limited. And yet time after time, as he would study these reports, he would see people who would end up living long, happy, healthy lives. And so what he noticed is that in the medical research, when that did happen, the doctors would simply attribute that to an anomaly, right? They would say, oh, that just happens sometimes. And as a scientist, as a psychiatrist, he thought that wasn't a good enough answer. There must be more to it because it keeps happening, relatively frequently for how often it should happen to cure the incurable. And so he spent the next couple of decades traveling the world, meeting all these people, poring over medical records, making sure it wasn't just misdiagnoses, and trying to figure out exactly what they did and seeing if there were any commonalities between these people who were destined to die in the short term, see if there were any commonalities that helped them survive and even eliminate in future tests. It would show that they had eliminated the disease that was supposed to kill them. And so he wanted to know what do they have in common, and is there something we can take away and apply? And so he studied that for 15 or 20 years. And in the end, he found that there were these very interesting commonalities that they centered primarily around diet, one, and then around stuff to do with our mental habits, with healing from trauma, with stress levels, with how we think about our existence, how we think about our thinking, what do we do with our mind in times of high stress. And so this book is one of the most fascinating books I've ever read, and it gives me comfort as someone who sometimes struggles with death anxiety. It gives me comfort that no matter what anybody tells you, there's always a chance. There's always something that you can do, and that when it comes to the medical establishment, nothing is ever completely out of our hands. Now, this doesn't mean if you sit there and meditate all day, you're going to cure some incurable diseases, but there are people who have made life changes and who the doctors cannot explain why they healed while others didn't. And so even if it's just, increases your percentage of survival by 1%, that is incredibly meaningful compared to zero, right? And so I found this book incredibly fascinating. I find that it really soothed my health anxiety and kind of gave me this perspective that I know one day in the future will pay off, that no matter what happens, no matter what kind of news you get, you still have the power to choose how you want to live your life, and that terminal diagnoses, just the mere fact that we know they are not terminal in 100% of the cases. So there's always the chance, right? There's always something that we can do to improve our mindset, to improve our life. And if nothing else, just that having that perspective will at the very least mean that your stress levels are going to be reduced, that you'll feel more in control. And if nothing else, if we go out feeling that way as opposed to the fear and dread and this belief that there's nothing we can do to improve our situation, that's worthy in itself, right? And so today I'm going to read you some of these quotes from this book and hopefully motivate you to pick it up, especially if you're dealing with things like chronic pain, illness, disease, or you have someone in your life who does, and who wants to learn, what did these people who seem to have cured the incurable, what do these people do that maybe I can apply some measure of it to my life? And so let's have a look at some of that. He says here, 90% of chronic illness is driven not by the genome, but by disease-creating factors in our environments. Positive emotions and happiness literally make us healthier by boosting immune function. And this is something that's going to come up a lot, and it's something that some of the people who had kind of give him whatever these things are called, blurbs, you could see there at the top, Bessel van der Kolk, author of The Body Keeps the Score, that many people have read, that we've read here on the channel. As well as ones by Dr. Gabor Mate, who wrote When the Body Says No, an incredible book that we read in our book club. And both those books specifically talk endlessly about this idea that what we do inside our heads impacts what happens in our body, right? Both in the positive and in the negative. If we continue to live in our trauma, if we continue to suppress our true emotions, suppress our true self, if we live in this sense of anxiety and dread all our lives, eventually it's going to impact our physical health. The chemicals that it causes to surge through our bodies are not ones that we can withstand forever. And so whether you're talking about it from a mental health perspective or a physical health perspective, what we do internally makes a difference. And time and time again in these books, we see that shown in very easy to see scientific research. This isn't just, kind of out in the stars sort of ideas. This is over and over in these books by Bessel, by Dr. Gabor Mate, by Dr. Jeff Rediger. They show us the research that what happens inside our mind affects what happens inside our body, which is incredibly inspiring, because it means that we can take action that will have literal positive effects on not just our mental health, but on our physical health as well. And this is a little bit of kind of like a core statement for the book, and we'll look more at it in detail much later. But just to kind of frame our mindset for it, whether it comes from a therapeutic session, a loving relationship, deep meditation, or focused imagery, love touches and heals something that medications can't touch. And we know the opposite of this. We've seen and we've heard the stories of people who die from quote unquote heartbreak, right? When one partner passes, usually end of life, an older couple, when one person passes away, the second partner oftentimes follows very quickly behind, oftentimes deteriorating in a way that it wasn't looking like it was going to happen before the passing of the partner. And so we see the negative, or kind of the flip side of this, of love affecting our bodies. And so what this book and so many of these books that we just mentioned talk about is that the opposite is also true, right? That when we fill our hearts, our minds with love or positive emotions, not just romantic, but we'll look at one of the things that I talk about most often on this channel. It came from this book, this idea of micro connections, meaning that any connection we have out in the world, whether with someone we know well and we care about and we spend a lot of time with, or that Uber driver or that grocery clerk, all of it has an impact on our health. Again, through the science, the research that we'll look at in a little bit, it showcases that very clearly, that these little moments of micro connections, of human to human connections, have a real, literal impact on our physical health. And for everybody here live, here on TikTok, while I'm reading this, I'll tune into the chat a little bit. If you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, you can join the live streams by following our TikTok, is where we host these. And so a big part of the early part of this book is about the diet, because that was one of the main things that Dr. Rediger found in his travels, talking to these people who had cured the incurable. he noticed very quickly that the dietary changes that they made all sort of aligned with one another. And that was basically the stuff that we already know, right? Getting rid of processed foods, getting rid of sugars, getting rid of toxins like alcohol, and living a healthy, natural, holistic sort of life as it relates to our diet. So he says it proved without a doubt that the Western diet, which has now been exported to most corners of the globe, is a disease-creating diet, one that makes the soil ripe for the most deadly diseases in the world. The conclusion was that people who lived in counties with a high consumption of animal products suffered considerably higher death rates from typical Western diseases like heart disease, diabetes, and a range of cancers. And we just finished a book called Ikigai about the blue zones in the world in our book club, which you could find the link in the bio. We just finished a book last month called Ikigai that explored these blue zones, which are areas of the world where they have the highest concentration of people who live to be 100 years old. And essentially, but the primary key factor that seemed to come up time and time again is that of diet. Those areas that had a much more natural diet, less processed, less sugar, consistently showed the highest longevity. And the interesting thing is that in writing that book, Ikigai, it took long enough that they could see the Western influence. And so these places like in Japan, where before they had a completely organic diet, non-Western diet, and they had this longevity among their people, as Western world influences came in and the diet changed and increased the meat and the processed foods, they could see that the longevity of the people decreased, right? It was very clear, very evident that one impacted the other. And so if you want to make the most meaningful change that you can, it's a simple change of diet. And that's a very difficult thing. It's simple, right, but not easy, kind of like meditation. It's really simple to sit there and to just observe your thinking, but it's not easy. And so when you hear that, don't let that overwhelm you and think you have to go and throw out every single piece of sugar or processed food in the house. That's overwhelming. We don't really succeed as humans in doing that very often, but it just means, over the years, slowly working toward a more holistic diet, a less processed, less sugar diet is going to have a significant impact. And so we can just start small. We can just start with the easiest things we can do, right? Adding a salad to a meal every couple of days, having a little bit less sugar, removing some of these toxins, food toxins from our house so that they're less easily accessible, right? Starting to make the changes little by little, because we're not looking at right now, we're looking at when we get to this age where a lot of this impact starts to come out. We want to set ourselves up for success then, right? So taking the process day by day and trying to make these tiny little changes that are going to have outsized returns, which is something we I love this quote here, famous quote, but let me know if you've heard it before. Before you heal someone, ask him if he's willing to give up the things that made him sick. And we know this is like a truth, right? Because you can go to the doctor, and many people do, right? Millions of people around the world will go to a doctor. They'll be dealing with obesity or diabetes or heart problems. And the doctor will say, yeah, sure, just cut out all the bad food and start eating better food, or start eating less, or start exercising more. And do we do that? In the vast majority of cases, no. Right? It's extremely difficult. Smokers know that they shouldn't be smoking, right? But do they stop? No, because, for many reasons. One, unhealed trauma. It's the only way to find escape from something that we're hiding from internally. And so this truth that we have to kind of come to terms with. If we want to live healthy, if we want to apply some of these things that are covered in this book, Are we willing to take the steps necessary to get rid of the things that are hurting us? Are we willing to start working to improve our diet, to reduce sugars, to increase connections, to scroll less, to exercise more, right? Are we willing to give up the things that we like Netflix, like sugar, like cigarettes, like alcohol? Are we really willing to take that step? And again, it's not an all or nothing thing, but it has to be a mindset shift of I'm going to be willing to quote unquote suffer a little bit by reducing some of these, at the very least, reducing some of these things that are making me sick in order to live a happier, healthier, longer life. Says here, he quotes Herbert Benson, "We can either change the complexities of life, an unlikely event, for they are likely to increase, or develop ways that enable us to cope more effectively." And if you've read one of my favorite books that I talk on basically every single time I stream, because I just love it so much and I feel like it offers so much insight that is kind of touched on in all these books. It's really like the great summary of a lot of these ideas. That's The Untethered Soul. And that's exactly what Michael Singer talks about. This idea that we cannot stop the externals of life, right? What the Stoics call the externals, which are anything that we don't control. Ultimately, everything that isn't our thoughts, feelings, and actions. Since we cannot affect the externals, we cannot stop them from coming. You can't stop someone you love from getting sick. You can't stop your boss from firing you. You can't stop your partner from deciding that they no longer want to be with you. So reducing the complexities of life is all but impossible for us. So the goal for us shouldn't be to remove them because that's impossible. It should be, how do I deal with those situations when they come up? Do I allow myself to spiral? Do I tap into a negative frame of mind? Do I allow the voice inside my head, my inner roommate, to start to beat me down and to increase my suffering with suffering about suffering? Or can I frame my mindset towards goodness and healing and growth and resilience and releasing the ego and being for others, right? That is the great work of this book, of The Untethered Soul, in showcasing to us what that process looks like and how we can apply it to our life. So if you haven't read this, it's one of the books I recommend most often because I feel like it covers these ideas from so many different books and puts it all into one, because at the end of the day, what we think about, we might not bring about in the way that manifestation people say, but it for sure impacts not just our mental health, but if you believe all these other books that we read, our physical health as well. So highly, highly recommend that book. I'm reading here. You can't spend your life sitting in a chair practicing the relaxation response. What you can do is identify what else in your life helps you achieve that same feeling, that dropping out of fight or flight, and lean into it. Make space for it as though it were medicine, because it is. In fact, it may be a much more powerful medicine than any of us realize. And so this is kind of goes back to Michael Singer and The Untethered Soul, because he did try and do that. Michael Singer talks about in his second book, The Surrender Experiment, how he tried to basically, as a young man, he tried to run away into the forest and just live a meditative life. And he said life just didn't cooperate with that. It kept bringing him things to do, almost like side missions to take on. And the more he resisted, the more they would come up. And it wasn't until he started practicing surrender, that's why it's called the Surrender Experiment, because he says the experiment was his life. It wasn't until he started surrendering to what life was bringing him and to figure out a way not to avoid the complexities of life, but to how to go through them with the best a mindset and energy he could, that the universe really started speaking and really started bringing him a lot of goodness and really started to kind of align his true life, what he was meant to do in front of him, all of which led to the writing of The Untethered Soul, which has now helped millions of people around the world. But if he had lived in the forest by himself, yes, maybe he could have been very zen and enjoyed his life, but the impact that he would have had, which he believes, and I've come to believe, is really what life is asking us to do, is to have some sort of impact. It doesn't have to be on the global scale like Michael Singer, but even just to the people in our lives, to our communities, whatever it is, that is, it seems to me, that is what life is asking of us, is to make some sort of impact, to put some goodness in the world, to fulfill our true purpose, whether it's through our art or helping other people in our communities, whatever version it may be for you. Life wants you to get out there and do something, to put that energy out in the world so that other people can benefit from it as well. Thank you, everybody. I see everybody in chat. I'll get to the chat in a little bit. We're reading Cured. I see all the follows and the gifts. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Put your questions in chat, and then in a little bit, I'll scroll back and I'll read some of those questions and comments. And if you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, again, come join us live on TikTok where we do these streams. So he says, you may also need to recognize that stress and anxiety can be a gift, letting you know that something urgently needs to be addressed. Instead of trying to turn off stress or medicate away anxiety, we sometimes need to move through it, see it as an opportunity to learn, and listen to it so we can grow, change, and live an authentic life. Take the hermit crab. Hermit crabs feel pain and discomfort as they begin to outgrow their shells. For them, that pain is a sign that it's time to shed the shell and find a new one in order to grow. So often medicine and psychiatry, we prescribe medications or treatments that simply help people deal with the discomfort of being in a too small shell. Whew, what a line. But we need to recognize when stress and its related physical symptoms is actually a sign that we too need to shed our shells. Whew. So if you've been going through anxiety, stress, right, recognizing that it's exactly that. And one of my favorite teachings of that comes from one of my favorite books ever, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. And she calls it, she quotes a famous researcher who himself dubbed it positive disintegration, meaning that those moments of highest stress in our lives are meant to push us forward. They're not there to hurt us. They're not there because there's evil out in the world. They're there because our shell has become too small. And since we haven't taken the action to break out of it, those emotions are signals for us. Hey, there's some work to do here. And that's been so incredibly healing and motivating and inspiring in those times of high stress, in those times of anxiety, instead of looking at it as something that we need to escape or numb or medicate, to instead seeing it as a signal from our higher self that there is something going on here that is not right for us, that we are ready to break out of our shell, we are ready to move on and to become better, more complex, more put together human beings. And so the next time you're going through an emotion like that, right, or going through a time period like that, recognizing this is positive disintegration. This is me growing out of my shell, and I'm about to, to use the stereotypical butterfly, this is me breaking out of my cocoon and learning to fly. Right? And if you've gone through those really low periods, you know that oftentimes right after the darkest night, the light starts to seep in, right? We can use all these kind of little corny analogies of, right, when you get halfway through the forest, now the second half you're on your way out, right? And it allows us, when we pass through the forest, now we're in this open, expansive field, we can look back and we can have some perspective and we can recognize that that journey made me stronger, or at least taught me that I can persevere, right? Our traumas don't necessarily have to make us stronger, but they do teach us of the level of resilience that we have. And so another fantastic book that I highly recommend. Yeah, I just love that hermit crab idea. For years, research has been accumulating showing that love, both for others and for yourself, and connecting with other people keeps you healthier, while an absence of those relationships and connections can spell trouble for your immune system. And I'm not talking exclusively about deep connections. You don't have to run around falling in love with everyone you meet. Even moments of micro-connection can deliver hits of the potent love cocktail, spool up the parasympathetic, and keep it fueled up and running. And this is the idea that I reference most often from this book, both in the streams and to myself in my own head, is this idea of micro-connections. He talks later in the book, I'm not sure if we'll see it or not, but he talks later about in this book about an example that I talk about endlessly here. He says that the research has shown that you calling your mom and spending an hour on the phone, even though it's beneficial for her, right? She'll get more, physically speaking, the chemicals surging through her body. She'll get more physical benefit from the 5-minute conversation she has with the Amazon driver who's dropping off a package, or the Uber driver. That these moments of micro connection, of human to human connection, preferably in person, have a real significant impact on our physiology. And so if you're thinking, well, I don't have the friends, or I don't have the family, so I'm destined for doom, just to recognize you have the ability every single day, every time you leave the house, every time you interact with another human, you have the ability to build that micro connection, right? Instead of being on your phone at the grocery store when the checkout clerk is bagging your stuff, to have that 30-second, 60-second conversation is literally physically going to put the good chemicals into your body, to create the surge of endorphins and all the good chemicals that we need for our body to work at optimal, whatever we want to call it, right? That all happens even in those moments of micro connections. It doesn't have to be a deep, meaningful connection. It doesn't have to be a deep and meaningful conversation. It doesn't have to take very long, right? Just that simple connection of human to human, of interaction, has real benefits to our physiology, which is fascinating, a fascinating idea. And it's something I've taken away from this book. I used to be at Uber or taxi back in the day, passenger who I never wanted to speak to the driver. I'd get very irritated when they start up a conversation. I'm an introvert and I like to be in my own little shell. But after reading this book, and now plays in my head in that moment when I hear my internal dialogue saying, ugh, why is this person trying to start a conversation? I recognize, no, this is an opportunity for micro connection, not just for me, not in the selfish endeavor, but for this person as well. And if you ever had, an old person try and strike up a conversation out in the world, and sometimes when we're busy or stressed, we kind of feel like, I just want to move on with my day. This recognition that for them, it could be a significant aid to them, not just philosophically, but practically, inside their true body, right? Physically speaking, that's a much greater motivator, than just, they just want to talk because they just want to talk, right? Like, I'm doing a goodness, I'm putting good out in the world by building these micro connections for both parties, both for me and for the person I'm interacting with, right? So if you like to do good, if you like to do charity work, that's about the easiest charity work you can do, and it might have a greater impact based on some of these studies than some of the more grander things we can do. Definitely more than potentially donating money, right? Donating your time, your attention, your energy can have a real significant impact on the world. Yeah, I see here the question, what if people in the community are quite low vibrations? That doesn't matter because I don't control what other people do, right? I can only control what I can control. Going back to the internals, the idea from the Stoics, right? I can only control my thoughts, my feelings, and my action. And if you say like, well, I can't control it, well, you have the ability to, with practice, with studies of this, you can develop the ability to at the very least, control your responses to those things. And so what they do is none of my business. I put that energy in the world, and whether they're open to receiving it or not, again, the studies of this show that they do get a benefit physically from those moments of micro connection, even if the rest of their energy is very negative. Does that mean that it's our responsibility to go and fix them and shove our good energy down their throat? No, we everybody has to protect themselves first to enable yourself to have that energy to give later, right? We don't want to deplete ourselves by always giving to people who are only takers. But if you're trying to share some goodness with the checkout clerk at the grocery store and they're kind of snappy about it, that's fine. That's none of my business. That's a them problem, not a me problem. I put out the energy that is within my control, and I release attachment to my expectation or my result, right? We know this, like, that feeling when you, let's say, give a homeless person some money and they don't, or some food, and they don't react. And you have this sense of like, it's almost like it taints the good thing, because maybe subconsciously what we were looking for is that feeling of gratitude so we could feel good about ourselves, right? In those moments, it's important for us to remember, and I've had to, instill this in my own mind. It's not about that. It shouldn't be done as a selfish pursuit to get the good feelings that I want. It's about you're doing it to help somebody else, right? And so it doesn't matter how they react to it. That's a them problem, not a me problem. I use that line for myself in my own head for so many different scenarios, right? When people are attacking, when people are not receptive, when people are mean, that's a them problem, not a me problem. My job is to figure out, is this like something that I can withstand, that is worthwhile for me to withstand, or do I need to remove myself from this situation because they're clearly not receptive to the energy? But again, that's the internal. That's the thing I can control, is making that decision. I can't control what they do. And as the book The Four Agreements showcases, it's don't take anything personally, right? When somebody's snappy at you at the grocery store or when you're driving, right? That's because they have their stuff going on. And so often we internalize, or you get bullied at school, right? That's something that's coming out of their energy, of their experience, that has nothing to do with us. And it's so difficult, especially in that example of getting bullied or somebody being mean at school when you're young. It's so difficult to really take on that perspective that it has nothing to do with me. If I wasn't here, they would find somebody else to do it to, because all they're looking for is an outlet to release their own pain. And so we've worked endlessly with our son, who's 10 years old, to let him know and to really make him understand that when you see these people out in the world, when you have experiences with them, you have to remind yourself, don't take anything personally. It's about their pain that they're trying to alleviate. They're trying to get rid of some of that energy. And the only way they know how to do it, usually, unfortunately, because somebody has modeled that energy in their life, which is why they're so unhappy and so aggressive, right? Their parents or primary caregivers. We have to recognize in those moments that's a them problem, not a me problem. I'm only responsible for my energy, and everything else is not about me. Now, of course, that comes to we can't use that to be aggressive towards other people, or people who are very mean might use that to say, well, it's not my problem. I just tell it like it is, right? We've all heard that from those types of people. I just tell it like it is. Well, if you're hurting somebody else, then that's not just telling it like it is, right? There has to be some sort of balance. But as long as our mindset is aimed towards goodness and healing and growth and being for other people, that's all we need to worry about, right? But again, not using it to say, well, I'm only responsible for me, so I'm just going to do what I want, and if people don't like it, that's on them. No, there has to be a balance of goodness while using that philosophy, right? I bought this book off Amazon, so it should be there. Think of how often you've used the phrases gut feeling or broken heart or told someone you had butterflies in your stomach. You feel different emotions in different parts of your body for a good reason. These areas are hotbeds of neuroreceptors. Recent research is showing that we actually have three brains: the head brain, heart brain, and gut brain, and our health and development depend on keeping them in balance and alignment. With the vagus as the connecting cord, emotions flood through our systems in the form of neural messages and hormones. Some signals begin in the gut or the heart and flow upstream to the head brain, while others cascade from above. In this way, our thoughts and emotions have both instant and long-lasting effects on all our biological systems: nervous, endocrine, immune. And this is something that in our last stream where we spoke about Dr. Joe Dispenza's "You Are the Placebo," this is something we looked at in there as well, right? That our thoughts influence our physiology. So many of these books, Gabor Mate's "When the Body Says No," "The Body Keeps the Score," Alice Miller's "The Body Never Lies," right? All these books showcase the same idea that what happens in our mind affects our bodies, and then what happens in our bodies conversely often affects our mind when it shouldn't, right? Because we're sick or in pain, we often add suffering to our suffering by allowing this internal conversation that just makes us feel worse, right? Like, oh, I'm never going to get better. This is never going to go away. This sucks. I hate this, right? But how does that change our experience for the positive? It doesn't. It only adds suffering to our suffering, which is an idea from the Stoics. Don't add suffering to your suffering. Figure out how to handle the externals while keeping the internals clean, so to speak, right? We think of the love we share with a spouse as being the most important love out there. And in certain aspects, socially, culturally, it is. What we don't realize is that when it comes to our health and biological systems, each moment of microconnection, whether it's with your spouse, with a friend, or with an Uber driver you just met, is equally as important as the next and carries the same weight. And that's such a powerful, because it's not even saying, well, it's good too. It's saying it's equally as important. Your interaction with your Uber driver is equally important from a physiological standpoint as your interaction with your family, with your loved one, with your partner, right? They all matter equally, right? As far, again, physiologically speaking. Fredrickson is telling us that to feel better, we need to expand our definition of love. We need to see all moments of microconnection as meaningful, because when we do, we are more open to connection and more open to feeling the positive emotions of love, compassion, and empathy. And again, you know this, if you're someone like me, an introvert who doesn't necessarily like to converse with strangers out in the world, when you do have those interactions, right, they often give you this surge of adrenaline, right? You leave that interaction thinking, oh, that was nowhere near as bad as I thought it would be, right? When we resist going to the party, and then, a party where we don't know most of the people, then we often find that once we're there, once we get over that initial fear, once we have one or two little interactions, and ends up filling us up instead of depleting us, right? This leads to what Fredrickson calls an upward spiral of the heart. It is a self-perpetuating cycle where the better you get at it, the more health benefits you reap and the easier it gets. Fredrickson calls it a use it or lose it situation. If you're rusty, you have to get back on the bike and teach yourself to ride again. It'll feel awkward and hard at first, but it doesn't take very long until it becomes second nature and you gain momentum. And so taking the introvert example of that party, right? The first person you speak to at the party, extremely difficult, right? Extremely anxiety provoking. The second person, a little less so. By the end of the party, now that you've spoken to 6, 7 people, the 8th person is going to be much easier. You're going to get into that flow, right? The first time you have a conversation with an Uber driver, it might be super awkward. The 10th time, it's going to be a lot less awkward. You might find that you actually enjoy it, right? It's like with anything in life. It gets easier and easier the more we do it. And so if you're someone who worries that you're not taking advantage of this idea of micro connection energy, just start small. What is the least anxiety provoking situation where I would normally shut down? How could I just add a little bit of connection to that situation, right? Maybe I only just speak to make it a goal at the party to speak to one person. As long as I can do that, that's okay. And the next time, maybe a couple more, right? It doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing, which is one of the most important lessons from one of my favorite books, Atomic Habits, right? Start small, make those tiny little changes, and allow those to snowball into bigger changes. Fight or flight stiffens your body, inhibits the warmth of your gaze, limits the genuineness of your smile, and overall inhibits your ability to make connections, letting those opportunities for micro moments of love slip by. Others can sense, if only subconsciously, if your vagus is activated or not. They can feel your genuine positive emotion and connection with them or lack of it. A person in fight or flight will have more difficulty, therefore, in connecting with others. And if you feel like that's describing you, don't use that to think, oh, it's, I'm doomed. Use that to think like, okay, this is something that I need to work with. I'm going to make those tiny micro changes, and I'm going to allow it to snowball, because the point isn't with anything, right? Like with going to the gym, the point isn't to be healthy today. The point is that as I continue to do this, I get healthier and healthier. But when it comes to things emotionally or psychologically, it seems for us that it should be an all or nothing thing, right? I should commit to this and then it should get better immediately. No, the things that have been keeping us down have been there for years and decades for many of us. So it makes sense that it's going to take some time to make that shift. Just like you wouldn't go to the gym, do 3 reps on a bench press or whatever, and expect to suddenly have big muscles. It's the same thing with the emotional side, right? It takes a long time, and we don't have to make it bigger than it needs to be. Let's just focus on each individual moment. What can I do in this moment to improve in some little way, right? How can I add a couple of vegetables to this unhealthy dinner? How can I drink 1 or 2 extra glasses of water, right? The goal is to get to 8 glasses of water a day, or whatever, it is these days. The goal is to get to a certain benchmark, but that doesn't mean it has to happen today. All I need is to begin that process, because as soon as I start rolling the ball down the hill, it gains its own momentum. And as I continue to do it, this if you're a runner or someone who goes to the gym, the first couple of times just feel like hell, right? You just don't want to do it. It's painful. And then suddenly what happens? You start to get that runner's high. And all of a sudden, this thing that you were dreading becomes incredibly motivating, because you felt the goodness that comes out of that. And so it's the same thing with these micro connections. The first time you're at a party and trying to interact a little bit more might be incredibly painful. But reminding ourselves in those moments, my 2 favorite sayings, I can handle this and this too shall pass. It's okay for me to be in discomfort. When I started going for runs, there was a lot of discomfort. And in those moments, our mind just wants and seeks comfort. And so it tells us, stop it. It's uncomfortable. But the real point is recognizing, like, it's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay for this to hurt a little bit. It's okay for me to struggle sitting with my emotions, to sit with meditation, to reflect on my childhood. It's supposed to be difficult because it's new, and because we've been suppressing it or avoiding it for years and decades at a time. So when we go into those moments, to going in with this mindset of, this might suck. This might be initially extremely difficult, but what are our 2 lessons that I've been training my son with since he was very, very little? I can handle this, and this too shall pass. These are just feelings, and as I sit with the feeling, the longer I sit with it, the easier it becomes. Hey, Annie. This is a book, Cured, by Dr. Jeff Rediger. All right, we'll read a couple more and then call it a day. If you want to surround yourself with this sort of stuff, we host a book club. We read a new book every single month. This month in April in our book club, we're reading The Courage to Be Disliked, a fantastic book all about, exactly what it sounds like. I'll open this here for anybody who wants to read while I speak. A fantastic book that deals with probably one of the most widespread problems, I'd say, in my estimation. One of the leading causes of anxiety, depression is this fear of being judged, fear of how we are perceived, the inability to put yourself out there because it's scary and sometimes it hurts. And we've been trained as children to neglect ourselves, to always be looking to serve the needs and wants and desires of other people. And so this is kind of the pathway of how do we reconnect to our true self and recognize it's okay for us to be ourselves. And if other people don't like it, that's a them problem, not an us problem. And again, within reason. It doesn't mean you can be a sociopath and just do whatever you want and think, well, it's a them problem if they don't like it. It has to have some boundaries, but as long as you're framed towards goodness and healing and growth, then nothing else should matter, right? What they think, what they say, that's none of my business, right? It's a famous Marcus Aurelius quote. What they say, what they think, what they do, I can't remember the full quote, but essentially that is none of my business. Only what I do, only what I think, only what I say. That's where healing and growth happens, is internally focusing on how do I be my most authentic self and be comfortable in that? I feel like if we could have a magic wand and make everybody comfortable with themselves and who they are and no longer looking externally for validation, we'd probably cure a vast majority of the ailments that are inflicted on us or that we self-inflict on ourselves. So if you'd like to join us for that or for any of the books or for our community, and we work with therapists and have special guests come in, that's all linked in the bio, and you can join for free for a month or just visit theacademyofselfhelp.com. It says, a recent review of 28 studies, including over 180,000 adult subjects, showed in stark relief how deadly it can be if you're cut off from social connection. After examining the data, the review panel found that loneliness, social isolation, or both are associated with a 29% increased risk of heart attack and 32% greater risk of stroke. A huge increase. I was just going to say that is a huge increase, and especially huge because it's a significant sample size. A lot of these studies have very small sample sizes, so it's hard to take what they say as fact. But when we're talking about 28 different studies and 180,000 participants, that is a significant sample size that we can begin to take some very serious truths out of it. And these are huge numbers, that 29% risk of heart attack, 32% greater risk of stroke. People who reported fewer social connections also showed disrupted sleep patterns, altered immune systems, higher inflammation, and greatly increased levels of stress hormones. And again, don't let that, don't take that in as a fear-creating mechanism. Instead, recognize, okay, it really does impact us, having people in our lives. So even in those moments where I feel like I want to hide away, I want to hide from the world, recognizing, hey, we can start small, we can start to build those connections with the micro connections and allow that to snowball, allow that to grow out from there. And if you've been, ignoring that friend who's been reaching out because you just haven't felt, as long as, they're a good friend, a true friend, because you just haven't been in the mood, maybe trying to work through that, maybe trying, well, let's just go for coffee for half an hour. I can manage that today. Or let's go for a movie where we don't necessarily have to talk that much, but we're still connected, right? Let me kind of visit a family, as long as it's, again, good for our mental health. Let me visit family that I haven't in a while, or call up the friend that I haven't spoken to in a while, or start up that conversation with the Uber driver. Because I know, if we need to look at it from a selfish perspective to get going, then that's fine. I know it's going to help me, not just my mental health, but my literal physical health. Right? We start small and we use these studies to kind of motivate and inspire us, not to keep us stuck in fear and anxiety, right? Adding more anxiety to our anxiety. So what do you do if you're a loner? Yeah, exactly what we said there, right? Find a way to be a little bit less of a loner, right? loner is often a self-protective mechanism, right? We've had experiences in our lives that have affected us negatively, that have been hurtful for us. And so our psyche says, you know what's an easy way to fix this? To never interact with other people. Unfortunately, what we learned from all these books is that's not an answer either, and it creates even bigger problems down the road. And so what do we do for a loner? First, we do that excavation. We start to self-reflect. We work with a therapist or a group in order to start to work through some of those traumas, some of those beliefs, some of those fears about the state of the world. And then we take these little moments of micro connections. We start there, the grocery store clerk, the Uber driver, the old person sitting on a bench at the park, having just this mini interaction that's very easy. It's easy to exit when you're done, and then growing from there, right? So joining a community like ours, for example, if you want, or finding a hobby where you can go and, let's say, do yoga in the midst of a group of people where you don't even have to interact, right? Finding a gym buddy, taking a writing class, whatever it is, to find your comfort zone wherever you're inspired to kind of start to build out that network, and doing it slowly, recognizing that you have years and decades to kind of put that into place. And there doesn't need to be the pressure of it all happening right now, right? Find your way where you're most comfortable. Even as a loner who's not comfortable in any of it, find the ones that are the least anxiety provoking and start there and let that snowball start to roll. Dogs and pets are fantastic companions for forcing you, a little bit out of your comfort zone, or at least out of your house, right? Taking your dog to the park, interacting maybe with other people who have dogs. It's why little kids and babies are really helpful in that too, because you want to do it for them, right? So you take them out, you take them to a play pen, whatever, and you end up interacting with other parents, right? Even if just a little bit, you end up making friends so that your kids have friends, and through that, you start to build out your network. And same with dogs. You go to the dog park, somebody starts talking to you, instead of immediately getting this feeling like, oh, don't talk to me, right? Remembering the idea of the micro connection and leaning into that as much as you can in that moment without, putting yourself in a bad state. And it's why, I feel like everybody who struggles with that should come read this book with us this month. Because the reality of it is, when we don't want those interactions, it's often because we have this embedded fear of being judged or being hurt or somebody thinking unkindly of us. When in reality, when we've gone out and we've put ourselves out there, more often than not, we recognize that as Seneca said, we suffer more in imagination than in reality, right? That negative thing that's we think is going to happen very rarely does. That judgmental frame of mind that we think everybody's going to have towards us, they never do. They very, 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 very rarely do. And when they do, it's a them problem, not an us problem, because it points to some internal suffering that they have, that this is their self-protective mechanism, right? Existing in that kind of aggressive or dismissive or judgmental way. That's a them problem, right? That's based on their programming, to quote the four agreements. And so, just continually putting ourselves out there, and the reason that we often don't is because we're fearful of being judged. And so whether you want to come read that with us all month long, or you want to do it on your own, I highly recommend this book, as well as some of the others that we spoke about today, like The Untethered Soul. Link in bio for the book club community, or visit the academyofselfhelp.com.